The conversation only grew louder as the season rolled on. Every sold-out arena, every television ratings report, and every viral highlight seemed to add another layer to the debate. For years, WNBA fans had hoped the league would receive this kind of attention. Now that it had finally arrived, many expected the focus to stay on the basketball itself. Instead, almost every major story seemed to turn into another argument over recognition, respect, and who deserved the spotlight. What made the situation so unusual was that A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark weren't competing only on the court. They had become symbols in a much bigger discussion. Wilson represented years of excellence, championships, and consistency. By the time Clark entered the league, Wilson had already established herself as one of the game's most dominant players. Multiple MVP awards, a championship resume, and elite two-way play had earned her respect throughout basketball. Clark, meanwhile, arrived with a completely different kind of momentum. She wasn't just another highly drafted rookie. She came into the league after one of the most watched college careers in basketball history. Millions of fans who had followed her at Iowa suddenly followed the WNBA as well. That kind of audience growth is something every professional league hopes for, but it also changes expectations almost overnight. As attendance climbed across the league, opposing teams began moving games into larger arenas whenever the Fever visited. Broadcast partners expanded coverage, and social media engagement reached levels that surprised even longtime observers. Whether fans came to cheer Clark or root against her, they were watching, and that mattered. The challenge was that increased attention also amplified every disagreement. A routine hard foul became a national talking point. A post-game quote sparked hours of debate online. Every controversial clip spread across social media within minutes, often stripped of its original context. One of the biggest examples involved older podcast comments from A'ja Wilson that resurfaced online. Some viewers interpreted her remarks as harmless basketball humor shared among players. Others felt the comments were inappropriate and criticized them heavily. The clip quickly became another flashpoint, not because everyone agreed on what it meant, but because everyone seemed to have a different interpretation. That pattern repeated throughout the season. One group of fans believed Wilson was being unfairly criticized for comments that weren't intended to be taken literally. Another group argued that public figures should be held accountable for their words regardless of intent. The discussion spread far beyond basketball strategy and into broader conversations about sports culture, media coverage, and public perception. At the same time, Wilson continued doing what she had always done, producing at an elite level. Night after night, she put together performances that reminded everyone why she had earned MVP recognition in the first place. Dominant scoring, rebounding, and defensive presence kept her among the league's best players, regardless of what was happening online. Clark faced a different challenge. Every game came with enormous expectations. Fans expected highlight passes, deep three-pointers, and record-breaking performances every night. When she struggled, critics questioned whether the hype had gone too far. When she succeeded, supporters pointed to the numbers as evidence that she was transforming the league. That constant spotlight created pressure few rookies have ever experienced. Every possession was analyzed. Every turnover became a trending topic. Every victory or defeat fueled another round of debate about her place in the league. Media outlets also played a role. Television panels often framed stories as Clark versus the veterans, even when the players themselves weren't directly involved in any personal conflict. Rivalries generate attention, and attention drives ratings. As a result, conversations that could have focused on team basketball frequently shifted toward comparisons between individual stars. Meanwhile, league executives faced a very different challenge. The increased popularity of the WNBA wasn't just changing headlines, it was changing business decisions. Sponsorships expanded, media rights became more valuable, franchise values increased. Owners began looking at long-term investments with a level of confidence that hadn't existed before. Players had been advocating for better salaries and improved working conditions for years. Now growing revenue made many of those goals more achievable. Discussions about salary structures, revenue sharing, and future contracts became central topics across the sport. For younger stars, this represented a major opportunity. Instead of entering a league where financial growth seemed uncertain, they were joining one with increasing national visibility and expanding. Nobody expected one rookie to completely change the conversation around an entire league. Yet somehow every headline, every debate, and every social media argument seemed to lead back to the same name: Caitlin Clark. What should have been one of the most exciting eras in WNBA history quickly turned into one of the most divisive. Fans weren't just arguing about who the best player was anymore. They were arguing about who deserved the credit, who deserved the spotlight, and whether the league was embracing its biggest opportunity or pushing it away. At the center of that storm stood two of the biggest names in women's basketball. On one side was Aja Wilson, a multiple-time MVP, champion, and one of the most accomplished players of her generation. On the other was Caitlin Clark, the rookie whose arrival brought record television ratings, sold-out arenas, and an entirely new audience to the sport. Neither player created the debate alone, but together they became the faces of a conversation that extended far beyond basketball. For longtime WNBA fans, the sudden explosion of attention felt overdue. The league had spent decades producing elite talent, Hall of Fame careers, unforgettable playoff moments, and championship dynasties. Legends helped build the foundation brick by brick, often without receiving the level of national recognition many believed they deserved. But when Clark entered the league after one of the most celebrated college careers in history, something shifted almost overnight. The numbers began telling a story nobody could ignore. Television audiences surged, tickets became harder to find, teams moved games into larger arenas to accommodate demand. Merchandise disappeared from shelves. Broadcasters suddenly wanted more WNBA games in prime viewing windows. Even people who had never watched the league before were now tuning in every week. That created a difficult question. Was the league finally receiving the attention it had always deserved, or was one player accelerating its growth at a pace nobody expected? Opinions split almost immediately. Many argued that Clark's popularity introduced millions of new fans to the WNBA, creating opportunities that benefited every team. Others responded that reducing decades of work to one player ignored the contributions of stars who carried the league long before national attention arrived. Those two ideas weren't necessarily incompatible, but online discussions rarely left room for nuance. Every highlight, every hard foul, every controversial comment became another chapter in a never-ending debate. Then older interviews and podcast clips involving Aja Wilson resurfaced online. One clip in particular spread rapidly across social media. During a lighthearted conversation about basketball culture, Wilson discussed what she described as an unwritten Hooper rule about attacking white defenders. Some viewers interpreted the remark as obvious locker room humor, while others criticized it as inappropriate and argued the comparison being made in the discussion wasn't equivalent. The clip reignited arguments that had already been simmering for months, with reactions ranging from dismissal to strong criticism. At the same time, Wilson continued to receive praise for what happened on the court. Her resume spoke for itself. MVP awards, championships, elite defense, dominant scoring, and leadership had already secured her place among the greatest players of her era. Few questioned her talent. Instead, much of the public conversation revolved around recognition, media attention, and how the league marketed its stars. As Clark's popularity grew, some commentators suggested that race played a role in the amount of coverage she received. Others argued her unprecedented college fame and exciting style of play naturally attracted viewers regardless of race. Those competing explanations became central to countless television debates, podcasts, and social media posts. Meanwhile, another reality often received less attention than the headlines. Growth wasn't just creating louder conversations, it was creating real financial change. For years, WNBA players had pushed for higher salaries, better travel conditions, improved facilities, and a larger share of league revenue. Those requests had existed long before Clark arrived. The obstacle wasn't whether players deserved better conditions. It was whether the league generated enough revenue to support them sustainably. As attendance, sponsorships, media rights, and merchandise sales increased, negotiations began to reflect a more optimistic future. Owners and players suddenly found themselves discussing numbers that would have seemed unrealistic only a few years earlier. That financial transformation fueled another debate. Many analysts argued Clark's popularity accelerated the business growth that made those negotiations possible. Others stressed that business success depended on the collective work of players across